Paris, 1837. The City of Lights is buzzing with change. Steam engines roar through new railway lines. Aristocrats flaunt carriages on cobblestone streets, and merchants are building fortunes overnight. But hidden in this chaos is a teenage boy, thin, tired, and penniless, walking the streets with a dream. His name, Louis Vuitton. Born in a tiny village in eastern France, Louis had no wealth, no education, and no powerful family name. What he had was grit. At the age of 13, he packed a small bag, said goodbye to the only home he had ever known, and began walking toward Paris. The journey took him over 250 miles on foot. He slept in barns, worked odd jobs, just for scraps of food, and endured freezing nights. But after 2 long years, the young boy finally arrived in Paris, determined to start a new life. Nobody could have guessed that this runaway boy would one day create the world's most powerful luxury empire, worth over $500 billion. This is the untold story of Louis Vuitton. Louis Vuitton was born on August 4th, 1821, in Angers, a small village in the Jura Mountains of France. His father, Xavier, was a farmer and carpenter. His mother, Coronne, was a hat maker. The family lived simply, but tragedy struck early. When Louis was just 10 years old, his mother died. His father remarried soon after, and young Louis found himself at odds with his new stepmother. The house no longer felt like home. At 13, restless and unhappy, Louis made a bold decision. He would leave everything behind and go to Paris, the beating heart of opportunity. The distance? Over 250 miles. The journey? On foot. For most boys his age, this would be madness. But Louis had determination carved into his soul. For 2 years, he walked, stopping to work for farmers and craftsmen along the way. Those years of wandering toughened him, giving him both skill and survival instincts. By 1837, Louis arrived in Paris. Paris in the 1830s was a city of contradictions. Streets were filled with horse-drawn carriages, mud, and beggars, yet also with elegant women in silks, aristocrats with gold canes, and mansions glittering with chandeliers. Louis was overwhelmed, but he knew he couldn't waste time. He found work as an apprentice with a respected trunk and box maker, Monsieur Maréchal. This was no ordinary job. Wealthy Parisians needed their belongings packed and protected for travel. Clothes, jewelry, even delicate perfumes. Louis quickly stood out. He was precise, patient, and creative. While others treated the job as routine labor, Louis treated each trunk like a piece of art. His reputation began to grow. Wealthy clients noticed his dedication. And slowly, the poor boy from Angers was making a name for himself. But what really set Louis apart was timing. The Industrial Revolution was transforming Europe. Railroads and steamships were shrinking travel. Time and more people were journeying farther than ever before. Travel was no longer a luxury for the elite. It was becoming a necessity for businessmen, politicians, and explorers. And with travel came the demand for luggage. Louis was about to turn this demand into his destiny. By the early 1850s, Louis had mastered his craft. But he wasn't satisfied with just making boxes. He wanted to change the way people traveled. At that time, luggage looked very different. Trunks were bulky, heavy, and designed with rounded tops so water could roll off during long journeys, by carriage or boat. But there was one big problem: you couldn't stack them. For wealthy travelers carrying dozens of trunks, this was frustrating. Louis had a radical idea. What if trunks were flat-topped instead of rounded? They would be easier to stack, lighter to carry, and more practical for modern travel. In 1854, Louis opened his own workshop in Paris, just steps away from Place Vendôme. Above the door, he proudly hung a sign that read, "Securely packs the most fragile objects," specializing in packing fashions. His workshop introduced the Trinan canvas trunk, flat, rectangular, and covered in a lightweight gray canvas. That was waterproof and durable. It was unlike anything Paris had ever seen. The innovation was an instant success. Soon, the city's elite were lining up to have their belongings packed by Louis Vuitton. His trunks became not just practical, but symbols of sophistication. Louis wasn't just making luggage anymore. He was making status. Success in Paris led to something even bigger, the attention of royalty. Louis's craftsmanship caught the eye of Empress Eugénie de Montijo, the wife of Emperor Napoleon III. She was a fashion icon of her time, known for her extravagant gowns and delicate fabrics. She needed someone she could trust to pack and protect her belongings as she traveled between palaces. That person was Louis Vuitton. Soon, Louis became the official box maker and packer to the Empress of France. This was the breakthrough of a lifetime. Serving the Empress meant instant credibility among Europe's nobility. If Louis's trunks were good enough for the royal family, they were good enough for anyone. Orders began pouring in from aristocrats, wealthy travelers, and foreign royals. Louis's name was no longer just a craftsman's name. It was becoming a brand. But with success came a new challenge: copycats. Other trunk makers began imitating Louis's designs, trying to steal his growing customer base. Louis realized that if he wanted to protect his work and build something lasting, he needed to do more than just innovate. He needed to create an identity that no one else could copy. By the 1860s, Louis had outgrown his first workshop. He moved his family and business to Asnières, just outside Paris, where he built a larger workshop and even a home for his family. Here, he and his team refined their designs further. To fight off imitators, Louis introduced new materials and patterns. One of the most important was the damier canvas, a checkerboard pattern introduced in 1888, stamped with the words Marque L. Vuitton déposé, meaning L. Vuitton registered trademark. It was a bold statement. Louis Vuitton was no longer just a craftsman, he was a brand. His trunks were evolving too. He created models with compartments for shoes, hats, perfumes, even writing desks, custom made to fit each client's needs. Wealthy travelers could now carry their entire lifestyle with them, elegantly and securely. Louis' trunks weren't just luggage anymore. They were dream machines. Each one represented adventure, freedom, and the promise of luxury travel. But in 1892, at the height of his success, Louis Vuitton passed away at the age of 70. His death could have marked the end of his company. But instead, it was just the beginning, because his son Georges was about to take the brand to heights Louis himself had never imagined. When Louis passed away in 1892, the company was left in the hands of his only son, Georges Vuitton. Georges had inherited not just his father's craftsmanship, but also his vision. He knew that the world was changing. International travel was booming, and luxury buyers wanted something that spoke louder than practicality. They wanted identity. So, in 1896, Georges introduced what would become the most iconic symbol in fashion, the Louis Vuitton monogram. Inspired by Japanese designs and Victorian motifs, the monogram combined LV's initials with floral patterns. It was beautiful, instantly recognizable, and, most importantly, nearly impossible to copy. At first, critics thought it was too bold, but within years, the LV monogram became the ultimate status symbol. Owning a Louis Vuitton trunk meant not only that you were wealthy, but that you had taste, refinement, and global reach. Georges also expanded aggressively. He opened stores in London, New York, and Buenos Aires, making Louis Vuitton an international brand. By the early 20th century, Vuitton had gone from a single workshop in Paris to a global luxury name. But ahead lay challenges no one could have predicted. The early 1900s were turbulent times. As Europe marched toward World War I, luxury was no longer a priority. Materials were scarce, factories slowed, and international travel nearly stopped. But Vuitton adapted. During the war, the company focused on making sturdy, practical designs. Georges kept the brand alive, not as flashy, but as resilient. Then came World War II, and with it, an even darker chapter. France fell to Nazi occupation, and many French businesses struggled to survive. Documents later revealed that members of the Vuitton family had collaborated with the Vichy regime, producing goods for German officers to keep the company afloat. It was a morally complicated time, and while the brand endured, its reputation carried scars. Still, Louis Vuitton survived where many luxury houses did not. After the war, the company focused on rebuilding, leaning heavily on its core, the monogram, the trunks, and the dream of travel. By mid-20th century, the company was run by Gaston Louis Vuitton, Georges' son. Gaston was deeply passionate about design and continued to expand the brand's legacy. But the true transformation came decades later. In 1987, Louis Vuitton merged with champagne and cognac producers Moet et Chandon and Hennessy. Together, they formed what we now know as LVMH, Moet Hennessy Louis Vuitton. At the helm was a rising French businessman, Bernard Arnault. Arnault had one vision: to make Louis Vuitton not just a luxury house, but the crown jewel of a global empire. He invested heavily in expansion, marketing, and diversification. Louis Vuitton was no longer just about trunks. It became handbags, leather goods, and eventually fashion. In 1997, Arnault hired Marc Jacobs as the brand's first creative director for ready-to-wear fashion. It was a bold move. Until then, Vuitton had never ventured into clothing. But Jacobs turned the house into a full-fledged fashion powerhouse. From classic trunks to haute couture runways, Louis Vuitton was no longer just a luggage maker. It was now a cultural icon. By the late 20th century, Louis Vuitton had become more than just a luggage brand. Thanks to Bernard Arnault's vision, it was now the beating heart of the LVMH empire. But Arnault wanted more. He knew that the 21st century luxury consumer didn't just buy products. They bought dreams, stories, and cultural relevance. So the brand began to transform. Handbags became the new status symbol. The Speedy, the Keep-All, and especially the Neverfull were designed not just for travel, but for everyday fashion. Soon, every celebrity, royal, and influencer was photographed with an LV bag on their arm. Then came collaborations. Louis Vuitton shocked the fashion world by teaming up with unexpected partners. In 2017, the Louis Vuitton X Supreme collection dropped, merging high fashion with streetwear. The result? Stores worldwide sold out in hours, proving that Vuitton could stay relevant with younger generations. Artists like Yayoi Kusama transformed LV bags into dotted masterpieces. Musicians like Pharrell Williams became creative directors, blending music, culture, and fashion into the brand's DNA. Louis Vuitton had evolved from trunks to fashion, culture, and even art. It wasn't just about carrying luggage anymore, it was about carrying status. Today, Louis Vuitton is the crown jewel of LVMH, the largest luxury group in the world. Under Bernard Arnault's leadership, LVMH is valued at over $500 billion, making it not just the biggest luxury company, but one of the most valuable businesses on the planet. The LV Monogram is recognized everywhere, from Paris to New York, from Tokyo to Dubai. For some, it's a handbag. For others, it's a piece of art. For all, it's a symbol of prestige, from a poor boy in Angers who lost his mother and ran away from home at 13, to a global empire spanning fashion, jewelry, fragrances, and beyond. Louis Vuitton didn't just build trunks. He built a dream that outlived him, a dream that 200 years later is still alive, stitched into every bag, carved into every trunk, and shining on every runway. And that is how a runaway boy with nothing created the most powerful luxury brand in history.